All right, let's dive right in. We're going to explore a question that, honestly, feels more relevant than ever. How do you hold on to who you really are when you're stuck inside a powerful system that seems dead set on changing you?
You know, this quote just nails it. It suggests that losing your sense of self isn't some huge dramatic moment. No, it's a slow dietary drift. It's all the little compromises, right? The things you slowly start to accept, day by day, almost without even realizing it's happening.
So let's see how this actually plays out in a story. We're looking at this character, Daniel, who's in exile in, well, the most powerful empire in the world at the time, Babylon. And the fascinating thing is, his first big test, it isn't some massive public showdown. It's about what's for dinner. It's a huge hint that public courage is really built in these small, private moments.
Now, you might think Babylon's strategy was all about brute force, right? But it was so much smarter and honestly kind of sinister. It was this whole psychological game plan. Step 1, relocate you. Cut you off from everything you know. Step 2, retrain your mind. You read their books, you think their thoughts. Step 3, they literally rename you, trying to wipe your past clean. And the final piece, make you completely dependent on them for everything. It's not just assimilation, it's a total re-engineering of who you are.
And that's exactly where the food comes in. See, eating from the king's table, that wasn't just about the menu. It was an act of allegiance, a daily ritual that was a constant, subtle reminder of who's in charge, who's providing for you. So to accept the king's food was basically to accept his entire system, his whole version of reality.
So how does Daniel push back? Well, he doesn't do what you might expect. There are no loud protests, no grandstanding speeches. Instead, he proposes a testable alternative. He basically says, hey, let's run a little experiment. For 10 days, let us eat our way, and you can just measure the results. It's so quiet, it's respectful, and he takes on all the risk himself.
And what this shows us is a really powerful idea, that private discipline becomes the foundation for public witness. That small boundary he drew, just over his diet, it was like he was building up the spiritual and psychological muscle that he was absolutely going to need for the much bigger fights down the road.
Okay, so that was the private decision, but what happens when the pressure gets cranked way, way up? Now we're moving from a personal choice about food to a very public, life or death command. Bow down and worship a giant golden statue, or else.
So when Daniel's friends are threatened with being tossed into a fiery furnace because they won't bow, the response is just, well, it's incredible. They start with this huge statement of faith. They believe their God is able to rescue them.
But then you get this critical pivot. Just 3 little words, but if not. And this changes everything. This is what separates a mature faith from a transactional one. They aren't saying, we'll be loyal if you save us. Their commitment isn't based on getting the outcome they want.
And here's how they finish it. We will not serve your gods. I mean, just try to picture that for a second. The music is blaring, an entire nation of powerful people is on its knees, and you're the only one still standing. It tells you their conviction was settled long, long before the furnace was even lit.
Okay, fast forward a few years. There's a new king, and he's throwing this massive, wild party. And then, out of nowhere, a hand appears and starts writing on the wall. It's a divine verdict. Mene, your days are numbered. Tekel, you've been put on the scales and you came up short. Parson, your kingdom is about to be split up and given away. See, this king knew the history. He knew what happens when you mock what's sacred, but he just chose to ignore it.
So yeah, it's a fascinating story from way back when. But what we're really seeing is a pattern, one that shows up in pretty much any powerful system. So let's pull this into our world. How does any of this apply to the kinds of pressures we're all dealing with today?
And that really brings us to the core question for us, doesn't it? We all live and work inside systems that have their own cultures, their own unwritten rules. So what's our shield? What protects us from that slow dietary drift we were talking about?
Let's get really practical here. The pressure to conform, it shows up in our modern cultural diet. And it's usually in the little things, right? The cynical jokes you find yourself laughing at. The corporate jargon you start using to fit in. Or maybe working those crazy hours, not because you need to, but because it's how you prove you belong. Every single one is a small compromise, another little taste of the king's food.
So the key to resisting this isn't just trying harder or having more willpower. It's about knowing, at your core, who you are. When your identity comes from a source that is higher and more permanent than your job or the culture around you, you suddenly have a different standard to live by. You have the security to not go with the flow. This is the source of what we're calling the weight of another kingdom.
And this leads us to our final section, where we get to see the stark contrast between these temporary human systems and the permanent, unshakable kingdom that Daniel represented.
So in this incredible vision Daniel has, he sees the whole sweep of human history as one giant statue. It starts at the top with a brilliant head of gold. That's Babylon. But as you go down through the empires, silver, bronze, iron, the materials get cheaper and, more importantly, more brittle, until finally you get to the feet, which are just this fragile mix of iron and clay. The big idea here is that human empires, for all their power, tend to become more fragile over time.
Think about it. Human empires are built from the top down. They grow by conquering, by accumulating stuff. But like we saw with that statue, they're always structurally brittle. But then, in the vision, this stone cut without human hands shows up. It represents a totally different kind of power. It doesn't just conquer the old system, it shatters it, it replaces it, and it grows organically, from the ground up.
And here's the big takeaway for us. It's all about perspective. The systems that feel so massive, so permanent and powerful from where we're standing, well, from a higher vantage point, they're actually temporary and pretty fragile. And when you really get that, a lot of the anxiety about fitting in just starts to fade. You can serve where you are with integrity because you carry the weight of another kingdom, the one that's actually built to last.
And that leaves us right here with this final thought. Human empires, corporations, cultures, they're all like that statue. They're ultimately brittle. But a single human life, one that's aligned with a standard of truth and integrity, that life carries a kind of weight, a permanence, that will outlast all the gold and iron in the world. And the question that leaves us with is pretty simple. What are we building our lives on?